Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
This time we're going to be checking out The Price of Tomorrow.
By Jeff Booth.
And fascinating book. I think this is going to be a three-parter.
Yeah, buckle up.
So,
It's a good one.
Jeff Booth, he kind of comes at this from a unique perspective because he's not an economist, but he spent 20 years as a tech entrepreneur.
Look,
so
he's got a really interesting taste.
He's seen firsthand how technology can completely change the game.
Totally. And that's really what makes this book so interesting.
Yeah.
He's not just an economist theorizing about this stuff.
Yeah.
He's been in the trenches.
Yeah.
And seeing how these forces play out in the real world.
And his argument basically is that technology is inherently
a deflationary force.
Yeah.
Meaning it naturally makes things cheaper and better over time.
Well, hold on. Let's unpack that a bit. People who might not be super familiar with those concepts.
What does that actually look like?
Yeah. What does that actually look like in the real world?
Like a real world example. Well, think back to those first cell phones in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
Like that massive Motorola 8000.
Oh, God. Yeah.
I mean,
I remember that.
Do you remember how much it cost?
I don't remember the price.
$2,000.
Yeah.
Back then.
Get out of it.
Only gave you 30 minutes of talk time.
Oh, my God.
And calls were $1.50 a minute.
Ridiculous.
And today, for a fraction of that price, you can have a smartphone in your pocket.
Yeah.
That's millions of times more powerful.
It's unbelievable.
And it does a million more things.
It really is when you think about it.
Right. It makes you realize how much value we're getting compared to just a few decades ago.
And that was just a few decades ago. That's what's crazy.
It wasn't that long ago.
Like if you think about
it really wasn't.
The span of human history, it's like a blink of an eye.
Totally.
And so Booth's point is this rapid advancement. It's great for consumers, right? But it creates this real challenge for our current economic system, which is built on this idea of inflation where prices generally go up over time.
Because the system was designed for a world of scarcity.
Yes.
Where things were harder to produce and therefore more expensive.
Right.
But technology is flipping that on its head.
Yes. And so you're saying if technology is constantly pushing prices down, that kind of clashes with how our economy is designed to work.
It creates a fundamental tension at the heart of the system.
I mean,
because
that's a big statement.
It is. But think about it.
Okay.
Governments and central banks, they often try to combat deflation.
Right.
Because they believe a bit of inflation helps keep the economy humming.
Right. They want things to be
a
little bit predictable.
They want that steady growth.
Right.
And they worry that if prices keep falling, people will just hold off on spending, which could slow down economic growth.
They're afraid that everyone's going to wait for a better deal. Exactly.
Yeah.
And the economy will just grind to a halt.
But Booth is saying that that's not necessarily the case.
No, he's arguing that this constant push for inflation,
especially when technology is naturally driving prices down, leads to some serious problems.
Yes. Particularly when it comes to debt.
Okay.
Because that's the other side of this equation.
So how does debt fit into all of this?
Well, think about how governments and businesses often rely on borrowing money, essentially taking on debt to fuel economic growth.
It's like using a credit card to buy groceries.
Yeah.
Right, hoping you'll have enough money to pay it off later.
Exactly, and sometimes those credit card bills can get out of control.
Yeah, you end up in a cycle of just trying to keep up.
That's what Booth is warning about.
Okay.
He calls it a Ponzi economy.
A Ponzi economy.
That term was actually coined by Adair Turner, another economist, but Booth really brings it to the forefront.
Interesting.
It's like a financial house of cards.
Okay.
Where you just keep borrowing more and more.
Right. To pay off the existing debts.
And the growth is just an illusion.
Precisely. It's not real growth.
Okay.
It's just inflated asset prices.
Not actual value being created.
Exactly.
Wow. And the numbers that he shares about this are pretty mind-boggling.
They're staggering.
Like in 2000, global debt was around $62 trillion.
That's already a huge number.
It is.
But then by 2018,
it ballooned to over $247 trillion.
More than quadrupled in less than 2 decades.
That's insane. He actually says if we were to try and pay that back,
at $1,000 per second,
it would take almost 8,000 years.
Longer than recorded human history.
That's wild. It really puts things into perspective.
It does, doesn't it?
So we've got this system where technology is making things cheaper and more abundant, but our debt-based economic system
is pushing in the opposite direction.
It's almost like they're working against each other.
It's creating this widening gap
Yeah.
between those who own assets.
The haves and have-nots. And this is where Booth brings in this concept of creative destruction.
Ah, yes. Schumpeter's famous idea.
Right, the economist Joseph Schumpeter.
Right.
And it describes how innovation wipes out old industries and creates new ones.
It's like a constant cycle of birth and death in the economic landscape.
Yeah, like Blockbuster and Netflix.
The classic example.
That's the one that always comes to mind.
Right.
Like I remember spending Friday nights
Rising those aisles trying to pick the perfect movie.
Yeah, and then Netflix came along and just changed the game completely.
And Blockbuster didn't adapt.
Nope.
And we all know how that story ended.
It's like the poster child for what happens when you don't keep up with technological change.
A cautionary tale for sure.
Yeah. And it's happening faster and faster.
The pace of change is accelerating.
And now you've got these massive tech platforms like
Google, Amazon, Facebook.
The disruptors.
They're the new giants.
They're leveraging what's called network effects.
Yes, where the more users they have, the more valuable they become.
Yeah. It's like a snowball effect.
Exactly. They just keep accumulating more data, more users, more power.
They aggregate everything.
Products, services, information.
Yeah, from Amazon to YouTube to Google.
It's all under their umbrella.
And then they use AI to personalize your experience.
Which makes them even more appealing and addictive.
It really makes you think about where competition goes in a world.
Here, a handful of platforms control so much of the digital landscape.
It's a good question, and one we'll have to keep exploring as we go.
Absolutely.
But I do want to touch on the sheer speed of this technological advancement because
it's mind-blowing.
It really is, and Booth uses a great analogy to illustrate this.
Oh, yeah, the paper folding one.
Have you heard that one?
Yeah, it's a classic.
So imagine folding a piece of paper in 50 times.
Most people think it would end up a few feet thick.
Yeah.
But in reality,
it would stretch all the way to the sun.
It's insane.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
And so that's kind of how we need to think about technological progress.
It's not linear. It's exponential.
It's happening faster and faster.
Across multiple fields. Computing power, AI, biotechnology, energy.
And that's what kind of leads us into the next big question we're going to be exploring.
The big one.
What happens to jobs?
Yeah. Are we all going to be replaced by robots?
Because if technology keeps advancing at this exponential pace...
It's a valid concern.
It is. And, you know, some experts believe that this is where we're headed.
AI and automation leading to mass unemployment.
Right. Because
machines are becoming capable of doing more and more of the tasks.
Yeah, that humans currently do.
It's a scary thought when you really stop and think about it.
And Booth shares this thought-provoking question.
Oh, yeah, the one from Geordie Rose.
Right, the co-founder of D-Wave Systems.
A quantum computing company.
And he asks, if you could hire Data from Star Trek,
would any human job be safe?
Chilling thought.
It really makes you question
what
the future holds.
And while AI has the potential for incredible good, right?
Absolutely. Things like personalized medicine, scientific breakthroughs.
It also presents some unprecedented challenges.
It's a double-edged sword.
So how do we navigate all of this?
That's the million-dollar question.
What does it mean for the future of work society?
And even what it means to be human.
Those are the big questions.
The ones that keep me up at night.
We're going to keep exploring these as we dive deeper.
Can't wait.
But first, we're going to shift our focus.
Okay, where are we going now?
To something that seems completely unrelated.
Oh, this is intriguing.
Human nature.
Human nature. What does that have to do with?
Yeah, you'd think it would be completely separate.
Technology and economics.
Yeah, but Booth argues that it's actually crucial.
Okay, I'm listening.
Because to understand how we're going to respond to these rapid changes...
To both technology and the economy.
We need to understand how humans behave.
Especially under pressure.
Yeah, when things are uncertain.
When the stakes are high.
So we're going to delve into the fascinating world of social psychology.
Oh, I love social psychology.
To see how our thoughts and actions are shaped
by group dynamics and our deep desire to belong.
And to kick things off, we're going to look at this experiment.
What experiment?
It's called the Robbers Cave experiment.
Okay, the Robbers Cave experiment.
It's ominous. Yeah.
It does have a bit of a sinister ring to it.
Well, we'll get into all the details.
I'm all ears.
But it reveals just how easily competition and us versus them thinking
can lead to conflict.
Even among well-adjusted individuals.
That's a bit unsettling.
It is, and it's eerily relevant
to the political and social divisions we're seeing today.
Yeah, and we'll touch on some historical examples, too, of how manipulation and obedience to authority
And boy,
led to some pretty devastating consequences.
I can already think of a few.
Like Hitler's propaganda machine.
A chilling example.
Yeah, and the Milgram experiment on obedience to authority.
We're really going deep here.
We are, and I think it's going to give us a lot to think about.
Can't wait.
In terms of how we navigate this future that we're heading towards.
I'm ready. Buckle up, everyone.
Hold on tight.
This is going to be a wild ride. So, welcome back to our deep dive into the price of tomorrow.
All right, so we're back. And last time we were talking about human nature.
Yeah, we kind of left things hanging there.
Yeah, how, our innate desire to belong, our tribalistic tendencies, how those can be kind of manipulated.
Right, especially when people are feeling fearful or uncertain.
Yes, yes. And you mentioned the robber's cave experiment.
Yes, yes. It's a fascinating study. Really highlights some of these dynamics.
Okay, so let's dive into that a bit. What exactly happened in this experiment?
Well, so back in 1954, there was this group of researchers, right, led by Muzaffar Sharif.
Okay.
And they decided to conduct this experiment at Robbers Cave State Park.
Robbers Cave, okay.
In Oklahoma.
Okay.
And they took these 22 boys,
okay,
all 11 years old, all strangers to each other,
okay,
and divided them into two groups.
Okay, so they're kind of creating a little, like a, I don't know, summer camp situation?
Yeah, basically. They called the groups the Eagles and the Rattlers.
The Eagles and the Rattlers, okay.
And at first, these boys, they didn't even know the other group existed.
Okay.
They were just spending time with their own group, forming bonds, developing their own little cultures and identities.
Makes sense, like any group of kids would do.
Right, right. But then the researchers, they introduced the two groups.
Oh.
And they started pitting them against each other.
Okay, how so?
They had them compete in all sorts of activities, baseball games, tug of war, you name it.
Okay, so it's getting a little competitive now.
And to make matters worse, they deliberately introduced this scarcity, right, and competition for resources.
Ooh, okay, so they're upping the stakes?
They offered prizes to the winning team, but nothing to the losers.
Okay, that seems, I don't know, a little harsh for 11-year-old kids.
It was. But the researchers, they wanted to see what would happen, and the results were pretty striking.
So what happened? Did things get out of hand?
Yeah, things escalated pretty quickly. What started as friendly rivalry turned into open hostility.
Really?
There was name-calling, cheating, even raids on each other's cabins.
Wow.
Some of the boys even started carrying rocks in their socks as weapons.
That's a bit disturbing. It's amazing how quickly things can turn sour.
Yeah, it is. It shows how even minor differences, when combined with this competition and this sense of threat, it can trigger this us versus them mentality. And lead to aggression, even in ordinary kids.
Yeah. I mean, so that's all well and good, right? Like, we see how human nature can be manipulated, or it can, go in a bad direction when it's set up in this way. But how does that connect to the bigger picture, the technology, the economics that Booth is talking about?
Well, Booth argues that as technology disrupts industries, creates these economic winners and losers, it can exacerbate those feelings of fear, insecurity, resentment.
Okay.
And when those feelings are simmering, it becomes easier for opportunistic leaders to manipulate them.
Yeah.
Using those us versus them narratives.
To consolidate power.
Exactly.
So it's like technology disrupts the status quo, right?
Perfect.
Then economic anxiety rises, and people become more vulnerable to those who preach division, scapegoating.
Right. It's like a perfect storm for those kinds of dynamics to emerge.
Yeah, and Booth uses that chilling example of Hitler's rise to power.
Yeah. Germany, after World War I, they were facing economic hardship,
right?
Social unrest. Hitler was a master at exploiting those things.
And it's scary how history can repeat itself.
Absolutely. And we see similar trends today with the rise of populism and nationalism.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we prevent these dark chapters from repeating?
Well, Booth, he argues that education is crucial.
Okay.
Critical thinking. We need to be aware of our own biases.
Be more discerning about the information we consume, the narratives we buy into.
Right. But it's not just about individual awareness. It's about creating systems that foster cooperation.
Shared prosperity.
Even when times get tough.
And this is where he brings in game theory.
Yeah, it's a fascinating tool for understanding these kinds of dynamics.
So explain game theory to me. I've heard the term, but I'm not exactly sure how it applies here.
Okay, so game theory, it explores how rational agents, right, whether they're individuals or nations, make choices in situations where the outcome depends on the choices of others.
Okay, so it's like a strategic interaction.
Exactly. And a classic example is the prisoner's dilemma.
The prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah, so imagine you have two suspects.
Okay.
Alice and Bob.
Okay.
They're arrested for a crime. They're held in separate cells.
Okay.
And they can't communicate.
Okay, got it.
Now, the police offer each suspect a deal.
Okay.
If one confesses and implicates the other, right, the confessor goes free.
Okay.
While the other one gets 10 years in prison.
Ooh, that's harsh.
It is. It is. But if both confess, they each get 5 years.
Okay.
And if neither confesses, they both get just 1 year.
So they have to decide whether to trust each other or betray each other.
Exactly. It's a classic dilemma. And the rational choice for each individual is to confess.
Okay.
Right, and betray the other.
Because they're hoping to get the best outcome for themselves.
Exactly. But here's the twist. If they both act rationally and confess, they end up with a worse outcome than if they had both cooperated.
So it's like their self-interest backfires.
In a way, yes. And this plays out all the time in the real world,
Yeah,
right?
give me some examples.
Like when companies pollute to maximize profits, even though it harms the environment. Or when countries engage in trade wars.
Right, or currency manipulation.
Hoping to gain an advantage, but ultimately hurting everyone, including themselves.
Yeah. It's like they're caught in this trap of their own making.
And that's the danger Booth is highlighting.
So how do we escape this trap? Is there any hope for cooperation? In a world where it seems like everyone's looking out for number one.
Well, there is some good news. Game theory also shows that when interactions are repeated, cooperation becomes more likely.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because players learn from past interactions.
Right, they develop strategies that reward cooperation and punish betrayal.
Exactly. So if you know you're going to be interacting with someone repeatedly, you're more likely to cooperate because you don't want to jeopardize that relationship.
So it's about building trust.
Yeah. And understanding that we're all in this together.
Right, we're not isolated players in some kind of zero-sum game.
Precisely. And this is crucial for fostering global cooperation on these big issues.
Like climate change, economic inequality.
Yeah, we need to see ourselves as part of a larger system.
But how do we actually create those incentives for cooperation on a global scale?
That's the million-dollar question, and is what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, I can't wait to hear what Booth has to say about that. Okay, so we're back. It's part 3 of our deep dive into the price of tomorrow.
Lots to unpack.
Yeah, I feel like my brain is a little bit fried from all of this, but in a good way.
It's a lot to process for sure.
Yeah, it really is. But we were just talking about the importance of cooperation on a global scale.
Especially in the face of these massive technological and economic shifts.
Right, and you mentioned that Booth is pretty skeptical of those traditional solutions.
Yeah, the usual suspect.
Tariffs and currency manipulation and even wealth redistribution.
Yeah, he sees those as kind of Band-Aid solutions.
Right, not really getting to the root of the problem.
They might provide temporary relief.
Right.
But they don't address the underlying mismatch
between our current economic system
and the exponential pace of technological deflation.
So what does he propose instead?
Well, he argues for something much bolder.
Okay, hit me with.
A fundamental redesign of our economic system.
Whoa.
One that's aligned with the abundance that technology is creating.
Okay.
Not clinging to those old rules of scarcity and inflation.
So we're talking about a pretty radical shift here.
A paradigm shift.
And you mentioned that he even suggests exploring a new global monetary system.
Yeah, something like Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. That's a pretty wild idea.
It is. But Booth argues that Bitcoin's decentralized nature and fixed supply make it a potential alternative to fiat currencies.
Which are controlled by governments and subject to all sorts of manipulation.
Right, and remember, Booth sees that manipulation as a key driver of the problems we're facing.
Yeah, that constant push for inflation.
Even when technology is naturally pushing in the opposite direction.
So in a way, he's saying, let's just get out of the way.
Let the technology do its thing.
But a shift like that to a whole new monetary system, it would require massive global consensus.
It would be a huge undertaking.
I mean, is that even realistic?
It's definitely a long shot.
But Booth is an optimist.
He believes that if we can understand the forces at play,
both technological and human,
we can collectively create a future where everyone benefits.
From the abundance that technology is making possible.
It's a powerful vision.
It is, and I think it's one that a lot of people would resonate with.
I think so too.
But I also think there's a lot of fear out there.
Yeah, understandable fear.
Especially about the future of work.
People are worried about being replaced by robots.
Right, and it's not just some sci-fi fantasy anymore, it's a real possibility.
It is, and Booth doesn't shy away from that.
But he also reminds us that throughout history, technological advancements have always disrupted industries.
And displaced workers.
But they've also created new opportunities.
And ultimately led to higher living standards.
So it's not just about the jobs we lose.
It's about the new jobs that will be created.
The ones we can't even imagine yet.
That's the exciting part.
It is, but it also requires a shift in our thinking.
We might need to embrace lifelong learning.
Adaptability.
To thrive in this rapidly changing world.
It's almost like we have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable.
In a way, yes.
Because change is the only constant.
That's the one thing we can be sure of.
So for our listeners who are feeling overwhelmed by all of this,
I wouldn't blame them.
What's the one thing they can do to prepare for this future?
Be active participants, not passive bystanders.
That's a great way to put it.
Question assumptions. Think critically, engage in constructive dialogue.
We can't just be consumers of technology.
We need to be shapers of our own destiny.
And it starts with awareness.
Understanding the forces at play.
Both the economic and the human.
That's the first step towards taking control and steering things in a positive direction.
This has been a mind-blowing deep dive into the price of tomorrow.
It really has.
And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of these ideas.
It's a book that stays with you.
It really does. And if you're listening and you want to dive deeper, where should you go?
The book's website is a great resource.
Okay, what's the address?
It's www.thepriceoftomorrow.com.
Perfect. So check that out, folks, and continue the conversation.
Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.
Yeah, because the future is not something that just happens to us.
It's something we create.
Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep diving deep.